On to number 3. So presentation and discussion of the results of the pavement assessment completed by Infrastructure Management Services.
Hey, Brad Murray, Senior Civil Engineer. About a year ago, we contracted with IMS to perform some pavement assessment for us. We've got all the data now. It's great to have tangible data to work with now and have that backing. Megan Ratliff is here from IMS, and she's got a wonderful presentation to go through all the fun stuff that we learned. So I'll kick it off to her.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you for the introduction. So as Brad said, I'm Megan Ratliff. I'm a pavement engineer at ICC IMS, and I'm here to go over our joint project with the City of Edmond. So first, I'll kind of get through the agenda here, just kind of going through this process and detailing what it is we did for this project. So first, we'll start out talking about the pavement management process and what this means. And then we'll go into what we actually did for you all, which includes our pavement management survey. So how we actually went out there and collected the data for you all. And then we'll talk about some of the representative conditions that we found in your network. And we'll summarize that and show you some nice charts and graphs that summarize that data. And then we will talk about the analysis and the budget planning efforts that were done for this project.
Hey, the microphone's echoing a little bit. I don't know if there's anything we can do.
Unfortunately, it's not.
It is, okay.
And just so you all know, we are recording this on our YouTube channel just because we feel like this is very, very valuable information. We want to make sure we share it with the channel.
Okay.
Should
Wait to the camera.
I speak up or down?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I just make sure when some adjustment. Okay,
Awesome.
we're excited to hear it. Keep going.
Thank you. Okay, so first we'll start with the payment management process. So this basically just means, you guys have certain objectives as a city. You introduce policies, you have certain goals that you'd like to accomplish. We're here to help you make that happen. So you have those, you come to us. We actually go out and we assess your pavement conditions. We go out and drive all of the roads, and we'll talk about what that looks like here in a minute. But once we do that, we present you with the data, and then we help you come up with a plan to use that data and produce actual practical pavement management plans. And this can mean, assessing certain streets and implementing certain strategies on these roads, maybe planning in terms of like when you're going to do these treatments to them. So optimizing the conditions that we have collected, and basically just an optimized plan that we're producing for the City of Edmond. So you'll go out and you'll actually implement those after we give that to you. And then after that, you repeat every so often. So every couple of years, this cycle is repeated. And I'd like to also talk about how we go about assessing these pavements that we're driving. So I'm not sure if anyone's familiar, but there's something called the Pavement Condition Index. And this is a number scaling from 0 to 100. That quantifies the conditions, because anybody can go out and say, oh, this is a good road, this is a bad road. This is a way that we put a number to those descriptions. You can kind of see, it makes sense, 100 being excellent, 0 being very poor, but these are kind of just ways to understand this data. So very poor and poor, so that 0 to 40 range is very important to understand. But cost of deferral, as you can see here, this is something that describes how a lot of agencies go about their pavement management process. So it's very cheap to try to keep roads in good condition for as long as possible. It's much more expensive to try to address them when they're already failed. You can kind of see the curve as it relates to the condition and the pavement age. But this just kind of points out it's much more expensive to try to fix roads that are in bad condition. So we try to keep them in as good a condition as possible, essentially. So that is one of the driving factors. And you can see here, we have some color-coded bands, essentially just kind of targeting where you have what we call a preservation zone. And it's best to try to treat pavements in that area because it bumps up the service life and it basically extends the life of the pavements for as long as possible. And if you were to treat it in the, the target zone in the red there, you're spending a lot of money. So just kind of hammering home that point here.
Ma'am.
So now I'll talk, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, here we go. I turned it so you didn't hear all my stuff. Any suggestions you could give us on the life of a pavement age? Because it says pavement age a couple slides back, but can you give us any idea about what that really means?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it depends on the type of pavement, and by that I mean whether it's an asphalt pavement, a concrete pavement. Asphalt pavements typically last anywhere from 20 to 30 years. Concrete pavements can last up to 50, but concrete pavements fail much more severely. They fail, and you've got to basically just rip them up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, does that answer your question
That's
about
great.
service
Yes,
life?
thank you very much.
So now I'll talk about what we provided in the first step of our project, which was actually going out and driving the roads, collecting that data. So you can see here we have our data collection van on the right, and I'll kind of just highlight some things on the vehicle. You'll see back here we have what we call a laser crack measurement system, and also show some imagery from this piece of equipment in a minute. But it allows us to collect all of this data that you see here, all these types of cracks and types of distresses on the surface of the pavements that we typically encounter. And you may be thinking, oh, well, it's just a crack, right? Well, that's not typically the case. We can usually kind of channel it into one type of category. And one of the most important ones here is alligator cracking. This is something that is considered load related, and it means that maybe the traffic is too heavy, or traffic grew too much for that type of roadway. It was over or under designed for traffic, if you will. But then there's also things like longitudinal and transverse cracking here. This is more environmentally related due to temperature changes and things like that. So there is some science behind the types of distresses on the surface. And all of this data we're collecting, we're quantifying, we're classifying everything we find on the surface. And ultimately, it leads to calculation of this pavement condition index that I mentioned earlier. But I also mentioned we have some of the imagery here from the laser crack measurement surface. And you can see on the surface, we're able to detail all of the cracks, all of the lengths, the widths, the severities, things like that, that allow us to actually calculate that pavement condition index. Another thing that was done for this project was structural testing. And this is actually something that is highly recommended by my company because it is a way to determine the structural health of the pavements. So on this earlier slide, you can see it's everything on the surface of the pavement. But what we're doing here with structural testing is actually determining the strength of the base of the pavements that we're assessing. So I won't get into the details, but essentially it just allows us to, like I said, determine that structural health. So good, fair, poor, things like that. And we've also got here just showing how we actually use this data. All of the data we've collected on the surface, the structural health, like I said earlier, gets quantified into that pavement condition index. And we do this according to the standard ASTM D6433. So this is not just a number that we made up or anything like that. And just kind of highlighting here, once again, the pavement condition index, you can see the scale here. But another thing I'll point out, pavements that are a PCI of 40 or below, we tend to quantify or define these as our backlog, if you will, just the pavements that are poor or very poor. Because like I mentioned earlier, they're typically more expensive to fix. So it's just something that we like to highlight when we collect this data. And now I'll get into some of the representative conditions for your network to kind of contextualize what these look like. So we'll start with very poor. Some of you may be familiar with these roads, so feel free to comment on them. And it's a little bit hard to see some of the cracking, but trust me, it's there. You can see that this one is heavily distressed. There is quite a lot of alligator cracking. And as I mentioned, that is one of the most severe types of distresses. It basically means the only thing you can do is completely reconstruct this road. So this is a PCI of 16. So we're starting off very strong. And then here we have the poor category. And this is a concrete road, and I'll mention this was an asphalt roadway, and they do experience different distresses. So here we have a concrete roadway, and you may say, oh, this looks like alligator cracking here to the right, but in reality it's something we call shattered slabs. So you can see where they got the name, but essentially it just means it's cracked all the way through the concrete slab, meaning you'll have to replace the affected slabs or potentially the entire segment. But this is a PCI of 33. And then here we're getting slightly better, less severe cracking, less prevalent cracking, ultimately still a PCI of 44 on that borderline of poor and marginal, something we may consider still reconstructing at this point. And then as we get into the fair category, we're seeing much less cracking. And I'll highlight here, there is not really any alligator cracking that I can see. It's mostly transverse and longitudinal. And as I mentioned, that's mainly due to the environmental factors that it sees. So we're seeing a PCI of 54 here. And then good. You may say, well, there's still some cracking. It can't be that good. But in reality, pavements crack. They're meant to crack. Concrete, it's supposed to crack is just something that happens. So the fact that, this one doesn't have as much as the previous ones, it does put it into that good category with a PCI of 64. And then you'll see this is very good. We do see some cracking here. These are what we call corner breaks. It's exactly like it sounds. The corner has dipped down enough for the concrete to break in that area. But overall, that's not that big of a concern. It's not something like alligator cracking or shattered slabs where it's really a concern that you would want to fix immediately. So this is a PCI of 76, and it puts it in the very good category. And then we get to the excellent roadways, which are usually the very brand new roadways where they have very little cracking, if anything. You'll notice it's a PCI of 97. This could just be due to some surface defects from construction, which are very common. There we go. Okay.
Don't let
So-
anybody drive on that.
Yeah.
So now that you've seen what some of the pavement conditions look like, now we'll talk about on a grander scale what this looks like for your network. So here is the distribution for all of the pavement conditions that we collected and processed for Edmond. So you'll notice that on average the value is a 65. So the backlog is a 12%. And at this point, I'll further contextualize in that 65 is something we see on the national scale, like this is a pretty average number. I say, this is a pretty average number. There's not a standard that says, oh, this is the number that you should strive for. This is the number that most agencies see. It's just something my company sees because we do a lot of this type of work. But 65 is something that we would consider very average. 12% being the backlog, exactly the same thing. Very average. I'd say we'd definitely try to reduce that number over the next few years, but it's definitely something on par, I would say, with the rest of the nation. And sometimes it's fun, or not fun, but helpful to view this from a functional class standpoint. And functional classes are basically the hierarchy of your roadways. It tells you what are most important. Obviously, major arterials, they carry the most traffic, the most volume of traffic, so we want to make sure that those are in good condition. Those being an average of 78, that's a great thing, that the most important roadways are in good shape. Sometimes people look at the locals and residentials and say, oh, well, those are low. Why aren't we prioritizing those? The answer is simply they don't have as much importance, but obviously we still want to make sure they get some love here and there. So that is built into the plan too. But sometimes looking at it this way tells us maybe we need to focus on this functional class, maybe this one. But the fact that they're pretty well distributed is a good thing. There's not somewhere that stands out as being a need to focus on per se. And just to further highlight, The breakdown of how many of these types of roads you have, it's very common that locals and residentials make up the most of your network. They have much more volume of area, of the pavement surface to really maintain. And then the other way to view this is by the pavement type. This just shows that they're pretty even. I would not say that you need to prioritize one over the other. Just the concrete and asphalt, they make up pretty much the same distributions here. And next, I'd like to kind of get you to see this from the other agencies we've worked with. A huge disclaimer, this is just a select few of the ones we have worked with in the surrounding area. And really just want to highlight the fact that, I mentioned this is a fairly average network. A lot of your nearby counterparts, some are better, some are worse. But a lot of the North Texas, they put a lot of money into their payments, and you see the result. You see, 93, 86, 83, 77. Those are all fantastic numbers. 93 is almost too good. In 50 years, they may have a problem if they don't maintain it as well as they should. And I'm willing to bet, and I've not looked into detail at each one of these, but a lot of them are probably newer development areas that are very new concrete, if I can just say that. But they will have problems in the not near future, but years out, maybe trying to keep up with all that new development. But just wanted to put this in front of you and kind of get you to understand, how you fare compared to your neighbors.
How often are you measuring them?
So it really depends. There's not a standard that says you need to measure or reassess this so often, but we tend to recommend, as the people that do it, of course, but 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, we're looking at doing every 5 years. We're moving to an annual collection of 1/5 of the streets so that the oldest data would only be 5 years old.
Okay.
So,
Any idea of a ratio that we have between asphalt to concrete?
I think on one of those slides you had.
So on the blue and red chart?
That's what that was?
Maybe not.
There you go.
That was the one that
You
spurred
do
my
have the
question.
Data. We could
Yeah.
definitely find that for you.
Just curious.
It may not be in this presentation, but it's somewhere.
Yeah.
Like if we find that the environmental factors are harsher on asphalt versus concrete or something like that.
Yeah.
Just curious. Thanks.
Any other questions before I keep going?
So
Awesome.
we told IMS, we told Megan it would be nice, rather than just comparing ourselves to Oklahoma, to pull some from Texas so we could see what some of these communities that we kind of look at as sister communities, what their average is, because we don't want to, say we're average in Oklahoma, we want to kind of broaden the perspective a little bit for Edmond, since we do see ourselves as one of the, premier places to live in the state.
That's good. Keep on.
Okay. And another thing that we delivered, is something we call Inform. This is one of our proprietary web viewing applications. This is something that Edmond has access to now and has been using for the past 2 weeks or so. So just kind of dipping their toes into this, but I've heard good things. It's a helpful tool to visualize some of the data we delivered, the imagery. We've provided all of the imagery, including the laser crack measurement system imagery. And it's all viewable in this web application. You're able to scroll around, look through everything, and anybody with an Oklahoma or an Edmond email address with the city is able to access and sign up and see all of this. So it's just something that we provided, and I think you guys are getting or will be getting good use out of this.
Is there a way to export like a heat map or something of
Yeah.
the city so we can
Yeah.
kind of see where the hotspots are?
We've definitely got some like citywide maps that are color coded, so you can see where the very poor areas are, where the good areas are, and all that. So yeah, we can definitely provide that.
Okay, thanks.
And now I'll get into some of the analysis and project planning. So everything we've talked about so far has been what we call current conditions. So conditions at the time of survey. This is very helpful data. It helps you kind of know, okay, where do we think we want to do some work? Where do we want to focus on? But this is the actual planning and the generation of the plan using optimized parameters, things like that. So we went through this process and generated a pavement management plan for 5 years. And I'm going to present some of the results, if you will, from that. So, and it's a little hard to see some of the text here, but I'll just kind of highlight. We've got the average condition here, so the PCI along the y-axis. We've got annual budget here along the x-axis. And then you'll see in green, this shows the result of your current budget of $4.5 million per year. What happens to the pavement condition after 5 years if that is held constant? So you'll see it would result in about a little bit less than 60. So I mentioned earlier your current average is 65. So you'll notice that is a decrease in condition over 5 years. So a lot of different things were considered in this. The types of rehabilitation treatments that you guys actually use, how much those cost in your area. Some inflation was even put in here. So all of those things that we can introduce, we have. But so you'll notice, yeah, like the conditions do deteriorate after 5 years if the budget is this value. But you'll also notice we've run some other scenarios. We have one where the goal is to keep the backlog constant. We have one where the goal is to keep the PCI constant. And then we have one where there's a target PCI goal. So there's, like I said earlier, it depends on what you guys want to accomplish after 5 years. But assuming it's one of these things, this will be how much it costs. So you'll see this very large number here of $16 million per year. I always hesitate to say things like that, but it takes money to get things in really good condition. And basically, yeah, that is what it would cost to get a PCI of 70 after 5 years. And you'll notice it's a lot easier to deteriorate than it is to increase condition, because you can do all this work, you can try to fix everything possible, but the roads that you're not addressing are still going to deteriorate after 5 years. So just things to think about.
I have a question. Okay, you
Yes,
say it would take 16 million per year for 5 years to do it. Then what does it take to maintain that 70 after that? Is it still 16 million every year?
It likely would not be. We would have to do the analysis to be able to tell you for certain what it would cost. But I can tell you it would be much cheaper to maintain that condition after the 5 years than it would be to get there in 5 years. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't account for new roads either, obviously.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
New roads aren't accounted for here.
Correct, yeah. This is only the inventory, things that we knew about at the time of the analysis. But definitely, in this, we have programmed any planned work that you guys have. So let's say that you have a planned work in year 2027. We have incorporated that, and it's reflected in the plan as well.
Can't afford to drive it.
Does it assume the same mix of asphalt and concrete?
So it assumes whatever pavement type that is currently there, yes.
And then does it prioritize major arterials so we can go, hey, like for a PCI target for neighborhoods, probably being 60? Okay, major arterials, we want it to be 70. Or like, have we thought of it in that way?
So there's, in the plan, it's automatically the hierarchy that you saw earlier,
Okay,
like
yeah.
the ordering. They're assigned priorities based on that. So yes, arterials are given higher priority.
And we can toggle that internally too.
Sure.
If we decide, all right, we've neglected residential streets for too long, we're gonna
Mhm.
bump them up a little bit, spend
Cool.
more money there, we wanna get their PCI to 65.
Mhm.
We can manipulate that in one of the programs that they provide us.
It
Yes.
seems like some of the more rural parts of the roads could negatively impact the PCI, even though they're roads that aren't driven
That's exactly right,
as a
yeah.
heavy load as second.
These are great questions. Is there any more before I kind of continue, or we're nearing the end, so.
This is
So it
great.
says we need to spend, so we spend about 5 a year right now. But that doesn't include intersections and
So
other stuff, right?
4.5 out of CIP, and through the gasoline tax, a little under $1 million. So in total throughout the city.
But like Danforth and Kelly would be on top of that, for example, right?
Yes, I'm sorry, that's correct.
So
if
intersection-
it's just resurfacing and reconstruction, it's 4.5 plus about $1 million. So
Okay.
it's about, yeah. But yes, when we go.
But like in that case, we're fixing maybe one of the red hot spots here,
Sure,
maybe some of
sure,
it.
you bet, yeah.
If there's water running under it.
Yeah, if we do an intersection improvement project, then yeah, that's.
So do you
that's not
know-
counted in that 4.5.
Okay. Do you know, anybody look back at what we spent, like all up on roads in the last 5 or 10?
I know, we can get that for you.
Okay.
I think we've got some on our website
Okay.
that looks. at
Because
that.
it's more than just the overlay, 5 million.
Correct, yeah, the 4.5 is just. the
4.5,
overlay.
yeah.
So if we do an intersection improvement, like, this is not taking into account the, second Brian or something like that.
Right.
The upcoming Danforth and Kelly.
Correct. Although presumably that probably doesn't make that much of a, right, an
No,
intersection probably
it's
doesn't
a
affect.
very
us,
small area.
Because you're looking at
Intersection,
mileage.
Right, and just a
Yeah.
little bit out, so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then this is just essentially showing the same information, but to me, it's much easier to visualize here. We've got kind of our bookends of what's possible here, showing the fix-all, and then in the black, you'll see do nothing, which basically equates to spending nothing on your roadways over 5 years. You know, I think ideally, we want to stay the same condition or increase it. You'll see here the one that's going up. Like I said earlier, the green is your budget, so I think there's room for an increase. I'd say that to everyone. Usually they look something like this. So it's easy to say, oh, well, you need more money. And the problem is finding that money. I completely understand. But that is where we're at. It gives you something to strive for, or at least understand the current state of things, though. But yeah, so
You'll notice that the do nothing line at the end of the 5 years is closer to our green current budget line. than
I wasn't
the
going to say that.
current budget line. Maintain current backlog line, so.
Yeah, that's always a fun one. People start throwing things at me then. But yeah, I try not to say that. But yeah, it's very common to see that it tends to be very close to the do nothing. That's something we do see a lot. But yeah, the truth is that it is close to doing nothing, and that's a large pill to swallow, considering we're talking about $5 million. But yeah, so keep the same condition after 5 years or improve it. That's really a good rule of thumb. It just takes, at least $10 million to do so per year. So with that, please don't throw things at me. But that kind of summarizes everything we did for this project. I'm happy to take more questions. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Would this
I have a
increase,
few more, but I'll wait for everybody else. Go
would
ahead.
this increase be on top of all of the other projects that we have that we look at fairly regularly, where we go, okay, we need to spend 165 million and we might bring in 40? Like, do you know the charts I'm thinking
The
of?
graph chart that we used before.
Yeah.
I have to go back and look at that.
Okay, I didn't know how
I think
new
it-
this, like, adding $10 million a year would fit into that.
I have to go back and look at that. I
Okay,
can't
no
remember how
worries.
we arrived at that number exactly. I think it would be on top of that, though.
Yeah.
I don't think we assumed.
Probably so.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Other questions?
How are you, I assume it's like a parametric model that you're using to determine the construction costs? Can you talk more about the inputs for that?
So generally speaking, we ask that our clients provide us with unit rates, or sometimes, construction bid tabs to where we can calculate what unit rates will be in your area. We have some default ones, but we don't love to use those because they do vary so much by area, or location rather. And,
We were able to provide
yeah.
Great.
a lot of information from recent bids for overlay projects and concrete reconstruction work.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I'm really excited to see the data. I'm an engineer, so I'm loving this. And I think it's, I mean, it helps, it's like in an actionable format that can help city leaders decide, okay, like, what do we want to do with that? There is a plan document that goes with this. Is that something you can share with the
Yeah,
group here?
there's a report that's like 200 pages.
Okay.
We can probably condense that down a little bit and give you kind of like this PowerPoint where it's the key points, here's some graphs and charts, those sort of things, but yeah, we definitely provide that.
Okay. Anne's really excited about reading that tonight.
If I have sleep problems, that's
That's what I do.
I think it's really good, and the way you kind of integrate the road condition with the traffic, I think is a good way to look at that. How do you guys normally today, I say you guys, staff, sorry, how does staff today prioritize the 4.5 million a year, like when you're looking at what do we want to
Generally,
do?
we get a pretty good feel from amount of phone calls that we get in different areas. We also have traffic counts all across the city, so we kind of use traffic counts and visual inspections of roadway. We've got a lot of experienced staff that can identify the alligator cracking. So if we get a call, we keep getting calls about a certain area, we go take a look at it, see if it's something that Public Works can stick a Band-Aid on for now, if it's something that needs to be really addressed and used for the funds. We've got our own little backlog of, we know these are priority areas that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
Let's see how much we can get out this year's budget, and then we'll keep that pile, and then the pile always gets a couple more added on to it,
Yeah.
during the year. So I've got 5 or 10 specific areas in my head that have just come up over the last couple of months from city council members or citizens, so.
Okay.
But now we have quantifiable data to
Yeah.
back that up.
It's a great baseline
Yeah,
that we can
it's super helpful.
keep
And we've
benchmarking.
done this before, but it's been a number of years.
Yeah, we last performed this in like 2011 or 2012.
Oh, okay.
So we still have some of that data.
Yeah.
As well, so.
Well, I am encouraged too that our main roads are above 70. That's good news, and I think speaks to that you all have managed that well the last, at least recently, or that our roads are newer, maybe it's a combination.
Thank you, Brett.
Yeah. And then also, I think what Chris said is true too, that the edges of town probably drag it down a little bit, right? Just because there's rural roads in a lot of places, so I'm interested to see that heat map, kind of to see where those are at. So in terms of next steps, I guess, this is just a discussion item today. Obviously, we're, in a few agenda items, going to start thinking more about budget for this year, and we'll have to consider how much we can afford out of the current CIP budget to put towards this, but are there other actions that you had in mind in terms of things that we should consider?
No, just to share the information.
Okay.
If a builder builds an area and it's gated, those residents are responsible for the roads, is that correct?
Yeah, so all this data that was collected was just on public streets that the city maintains. So if it's gated or even non-gated private streets, they're not the city's responsibility to maintain, and data was not collected on those streets.
So the 531 miles is strictly those that the city is.
Public roads.
Okay.
Is there a metric for understanding how developers are building neighborhoods and the cost that that's going to put on to the city to maintain those after that neighborhood's done? And how do we measure or understand the quality of those roads as they're being developed so that they don't deteriorate more rapidly, falling onto the city, getting a bunch of questions like, hey, my road, and we're like, well, that neighborhood's only been there 5 years, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, so we have an engineering plan review team, which if you talk to a developer, I'm sure they would tell you that they're too hard on them. But that's why
Okay.
they try to maintain a certain level of quality
Mhm.
for all things that go in the city,
Cool.
especially things that we publicly maintain.
Yeah.
So our plan review team are
That's great.
kind of the bulldogs for us to make sure things are built to our standard.
Great. Do you have a sense that if it is more cost-effective in the upfront to do a more robust road versus, in the long term to maintain it? Is there a trade-off, or is it about the same, or?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into play with it. The base of the road, so part of the reason we did the structural testing, or why we had IMS do the structural testing, is because we've got a lot of old roads that have had lanes added on over the years. Danforth is a good example. It's been a road for a long time. Original county road, I know Harry will talk about it for a while, but, so the center lanes have an old base to it. The outer lanes have a new, more robust base. So you may notice that the center lanes fail a little bit faster than the outer lanes until we do a full rebuild on it. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that kind of go into play, and where it's okay to stick a Band-Aid and do an overlay, and where you're just gonna be throwing money away and coming back to that exact same spot 10 years later.
The big prime example, that was Scoville, that we did from Penn to Santa Fe. We realized we need to put 3 inches of A and 2 inches of B down. We need to mill it all out, put that down, and so the base repair and all that. And so, because it was just, where do you stop? So it's easier just to do 3 inches of A, 2 inches of B, and it's held up very well for the last 20 years or so.
That's probably a case by case.
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, case by case, and, you know, we're trying to get the most bang for our buck with, you know, what we've got to work with, so, you know, if we could, we would reconstruct a lot more and reduce the backlog, but, you know, you kinda need to stretch it as much as we can and get as many areas and try to accomplish what we can, rather than sinking the whole $4.5 million into 1 mile, and that being all that we get done for a year.
Serve as many people as possible.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, it's really good. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.